One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey there, it's Dr. Noseworthy, and I am finally back to the podcasting. My apologies for being absent for the past week or so. I know that I should have gotten a podcast episode out probably about a week ago, but I finally came down with coronavirus. And I say finally simply because, number one, it was probably inevitable, but also because I wanted the advantage of the natural immunity. Perhaps that's a topic of discussion in a different podcast. So that's the reason for my absence. And again, thank you for indulging me on that. But we're back now. We're going to continue on and finish off our discussion on obstacles to weight loss. And today what I want to do is I want to talk about having clear goals. And there's honestly so many cliches that we could insert right here, like failing to plan is planning to fail, and you miss 100% of the targets that you never aim for or never shoot at. And unfortunately, one of the things that we see quite commonly is people embarking on some kind of a weight loss strategy, or I should say weight loss process, without a strategy and without understanding how to formulate their goals and their targets. Basically, most people will say, well, I weigh X and I want to weigh Y, and that represents X amount or X minus Y weight loss. And I'm going to do that as quickly as possible and, reduce calories, increase activity, and off you go. And obviously there's more to the story than that. But there's actually a fair amount of research now accumulating around topics like diet fatigue and what we might call settling points, so that it makes it a lot easier to plan and predict the course of your weight loss journey. And I think as I go through what I want to talk about today in terms of setting clear goals, what I really mean about that is going to become clear. And this is probably a good time to remind you that when it comes to permanent weight loss, you're playing the long game. You don't want to play the short game, because permanent weight loss and permanent changes to your body composition just do not happen quickly. And for example, any weight that comes off quickly can usually go right back on just as fast, sometimes even faster. Now, everybody wants to see a 20-pound weight loss in 3 weeks, but it's just simply not sustainable. And the things that you need to do to get there are often not long-term winning solutions. And so I would encourage you to be patient. I would encourage you to be kind with yourself and to not set yourself up by failure or for failure. And that means having clear goals and having kind of like a mapped out process that you can follow, where you can compare your progress to something that is predictable and repeatable. Now, it's a cruel twist of design for sure that it's very easy to gain weight, and it's much harder to lose it, and particularly to lose it and to keep it off. But that's the reality of the hypothalamic set point that we've talked about in previous episodes. So let's talk about a few things today in the context of goals. We're going to talk about realistic rates of weight loss. We're going to talk about diet fatigue and the benefit of taking diet breaks periodically to help reset your hypothalamus. And, we're at a point now where I think most experts would agree that you should never try to lose more than about 10% of your total body weight in one dieting cycle, or in one shot, for example. Again, if somebody weighs 200 pounds and wants to weigh 145 pounds, the general thought is, I'm going to go on one diet and I'm just going to keep pursuing weight loss until I hit my goal weight. But it turns out that breaking up that process into little mini phases, if you will, tends to be a lot more, let's call it scientific in its rationale, but also a lot more practical in terms of delivering results, but doing it to the point where you can continue to follow a diet without fatiguing from that, meaning without having cravings and feeling like you're constantly depriving yourself. So this is simple math, right? If we look at this this predictable or this recommended weight loss of no more than 10% of your body weight during one diet cycle, and again, it's simple math. Let's say again that somebody weighs 200 pounds. Their first goal should be to drop 20 pounds or 10% of the 200 and to get down to 180. Now, let's assume for the moment that in this example, that someone who weighs 200 pounds, their ultimate goal, their end weight, their goal weight is 145. Their first goal is to hit 180, which represents a 10% drop from their starting point, from their initial total body weight. And that at that point, when someone goes from 200 pounds and loses 10% of their body weight to arrive at 180 pounds, it's wise to take some time off from calorie restriction and, maybe dialing exercise volume or intensity back a little bit if they've really been banging it really hard in the gym, for example, and take some time off from calorie restriction and let that 20-pound weight loss settle in. And that's probably a good way to think about it. In fact, the literature uses terms like settling points. And because once you give your body some time to adjust to a new scale weight and a new calorie intake, then you are able to set another goal of losing 10% of your body weight, which at that point would be to drop 18 pounds off a new weight of 180 pounds to get down to 162 pounds. That would be 180 minus 18. And so we start at 200 pounds and lose 10% of that, which is 20. That brings us to 180. And then we kind of settle there for a while to let our body adjust before we embark on another 10% weight loss. And 10% of 180 is 18. And 180 minus 18 is 162. And so what we can do is we can break up the weight loss journey, if you will, into different phases where each phase is focused on a very specific numerical output. At which point, when you reach that, you take a break from calorie deprivation or calorie restriction, let that new status settle into your system before you embark on the next 10% weight loss. But here's the trick and the mistake that many people make, right? They get within a few pounds of their goal and then they just stop. They stop everything that got them to where they are, because if you're trying to lose a whole bunch of weight all in one turn, and if you manage to get that done, usually the changes that you have to make to allow that to happen are not of the permanent nature, and nowhere along the way did you ever stop to let a new status bake into your system or to kind of get used to a new settling point so that you actually have very little friction to continued weight loss. So people usually say, okay, my goal is 145 and now I'm down to 148 and that's good enough for me. And then they radically increase their calories. They stop going to the gym as much. And this is where we start to see the elasticity of the hypothalamic set point, because the tendency is your brain wants to rubber band you right back to the higher weight that you just came from, right? That's the whole point of understanding the hypothalamic set point. And in fact, the more that you try to lose in one shot without taking a break, and the faster that you try to do that without taking a break periodically, the more likely you are to rebound back to your higher weight. And in addition to that, add perhaps an extra 5 or 10 pounds for good measure. And that's just the brain's and the body's intelligence saying, we've just gone through a cycle of deprivation. If this happens again, I need to have more in reserve so that I can weather the storm of chronic calorie deprivation. So the solution is to know that if your ultimate goal weight is, for example, 145 pounds, then you actually really need to not just take breaks periodically and let the new weight settle in, for example, but you really need to keep going down below your ultimate goal weight. If it's 145, going down to maybe 138 to 140 pounds, to allow yourself a very small amount of weight regain when you adjust your calories back to what is going to maintain that body weight. That is how you lose weight slowly, how you lose weight intentionally, and how you lose weight permanently. The answer, obviously, is not in losing a whole bunch of weight all in one fell swoop. It is breaking it up into manageable chunks and giving your body time to adapt and to adjust to a new status before you ask more through calorie deprivation and activity. Now, there's another guideline that helps us to look at a timeline to hit the goal. Like, again, would take a theoretical 200-pound person who wants to weigh 145 pounds. We start with 10% weight loss increments, but we want to do it in such a way that we never lose more than 1% of your body weight each week. So we're shooting for a 10% weight loss in, let's call it a diet cycle. And we haven't even defined how long that is, because that's going to depend on how much weight you have to lose and what 10% represents. But not only are we looking at how much weight am I aiming to lose in this one diet cycle, if I break that up into X number of weeks, how much weight can I consistently and safely and properly lose on a week-to-week basis throughout that period of time, that first diet cycle, let's call it phase 1. So if we divide someone's entire weight loss journey, again, into different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, in each one, you're losing 10% of your body weight. And in each of those phases, you divide that up into however many weeks it takes to hit that point, losing no more than 1% of your body fat, or I'm sorry, your body weight in each week. So let's back it up again, because I know that, obviously doing a podcast, we don't have any visuals and I'm throwing a whole bunch of numbers at you. It's the advantage. You can always rewind and re-listen. But again, in our 200-pound example, in phase 1, we want to lose 10% of the total body weight, or 20 pounds. And because we only want to lose no more than 1% of the 200 pounds, or I should say of the 20 pounds per week, we don't want to lose any more than 2 pounds per week during phase 1, right? So the big number is you want to shoot for losing 10% of your body weight in one diet cycle. And during each week of that diet cycle, you're aiming to lose only 1% of your body weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you want to lose 2 pounds per week. That's 1% of 200. And you follow that for a period of 10 weeks until you accumulate a total of 10 pounds of weight loss. And so that's a lot easier to do repeatedly when you're in the beginning of phase 1, right? It's harder, for example, let's say you get 4 or 5 months down the road, it's harder to sustain higher amounts of weight loss as you get closer to your goal weight. But this is the magic of mathematics, and it's also the power of a scientific approach, because by the time you get down to, for example, 160 pounds from 200, you're no longer shooting to lose 2 pounds per week. You're shooting to lose 1% of 160, which is essentially about 1.5 pounds. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot. 1.5 is not all that much different than 2. But as you get closer to your goal weight, it's harder to sustain a given level of weight loss. And so it makes sense for us to downregulate our expectations and lose less weight, which is in an absolute sense, but it's always 1% of your current body weight per week. And it's a lot, we'll see that number get smaller as we get closer to our goal. For example, if my goal is 145-pound weight loss, 145 pounds is my goal. By the time I get down to 150 pounds, I know that I'm only going to want to lose 1.5 pounds per week until I get from 150 down to 145. And that will take roughly, let's call it 4 weeks, 3.5 to 4 weeks. So that's a lot more realistic after you've already lost a bunch of weight to expect these small incremental changes, again, the closer you are to your goal. The closer you are to your starting weight, the more rapid your weight loss will be, but it's still expressed as a percentage of your current body weight. Again, if you start at 200 pounds and lose 1% per week for 10 weeks, that ends up being 2 pounds per week for 10 weeks, which is 20 pounds, which matches our expectation of losing 10% of your body weight in your first phase or in your first diet cycle. And again, the math stays the same in terms of percentages, but the absolute numbers change as your total body weight goes down, and that informs our expectations of how much weight we could or should lose on a weekly basis. Now, if it turns out that you start out losing more rapidly. For example, and it's starting at 200 pounds, some people might lose 3 to 4 pounds a week for the first week or two as they lose water weight and so on. But if you start out with more rapid weight loss in the beginning, say in the first month, you don't want to set yourself up for failure by expecting yourself to be able to maintain that rate of weight loss throughout the entire first cycle or into the next cycle or even the next one after that. Meaning if you're 2 cycles in, you're not expecting to lose 3 to 4 pounds of body weight per week. You still have to pay attention to the mathematics, because if you experience very rapid weight loss, say in the first 3 weeks of your first phase, again, that might be appropriate if you're radically cutting carbohydrates, you're losing body weight through water rather than just losing body fat, for example. What ends up happening, though, is if you end up experiencing more rapid weight loss as you get closer to your goal weight, it's typically because you're doing something extreme that might be yielding you short-term results, but is not going to give you the long-term success that you're looking for. This is why the numbers and the math are actually very important. And I know I'm going over these numbers over and over again, but it's just simply because this is audio and we don't have any visual aids. So if in phase 1, which is our first diet cycle, we target a 20-pound weight loss total at a rate of 2 pounds per week, that's 1% of the body weight, it's going to take that 200-pound person about 10 weeks to get there. It's just simple math. 2 pounds a week for 10 weeks equals 20 pounds, and that would be appropriate for someone who weighs 200 pounds. Now, if you weigh 160 and you want to be 120, the math changes, but the percentages don't. So if we're 160 pounds and we want to lose 10%, that's 16 pounds off my 160. That's my first diet cycle. And I want to lose 1% per week during that first phase. 1% of 160 is 1.6 pounds. That would be your expectation. Now, if you get beyond that, if you, on any given week, if you lose, we're talking about averages, because what will happen in any given diet cycle, you may have 1 week where you lose more than 1% of your body weight and 1 week where you lose less. But the average over that period of time is going to be 1%, or should be about 1% of your total body weight. And remember, once any given phase is complete and you hit your 10% goal for that phase, then you stop and you take a diet break. And what that means is that you stop eating at a calorie deficit and you eat what we might call maintenance calories for whatever your new body weight is. If it's phase 1, we started at 200, we ended up at 180. Now we're eating calories that are appropriate for a 180-pound body, but we're not in a calorie deficit, because if we continue the calorie deficit beyond that time frame, then your hypothalamus kicks in, you're going to start down-regulating your metabolism, and what used to be a calorie deficit is no longer, because your metabolism has gotten slower. And this is part of what we're trying to avoid in structuring things on a phase 1, phase 2 diet cycle approach, and making sure that we understand what our targets are for each phase. Now, once we get into a diet break, say between phase 1 and phase 2, the maintenance calories may only be a couple of hundred calories more than what your calorie deficit was. It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be enough to basically explain to your brain and to your hypothalamus that starvation mode has ended and it can relax because you're going to feed it, and it doesn't need to reduce your basal metabolism. And this obviously prevents the hypothalamus from kicking in, decreasing your metabolic rate to match a sustained low calorie intake. This is why it's important to not pursue calorie deficits for too long without taking a break, particularly if you're pursuing a very aggressive calorie restriction. Because listen, you can reduce your calories by 50 per day, which is not a lot, or you can reduce it by 500, which is a lot more aggressive. And so it's about making sure you're making choices that you can sustain over long periods of time, and then taking breaks periodically to let your body settle into a new weight and convince your brain, don't worry, we're going to feed you. And that's all in preparation for moving on to phase 2 and going after another 10% weight loss with 1% per week increments. So in reality, at the end of phase 1, when someone who starts at 200 takes a break at 180 and they eat a little bit more food, they're probably going to actually gain a couple of pounds. They might go up to say 182, 183 pounds. That's actually okay. And that would be expected. And it's just simply part of the adaptations. You're not going to stay there because you're going to pause in your diet break for a while. Then you're going to go back to a calorie deficit that's appropriate for your new body weight. You're going to put some constraints around it so you're not being crazy. And then you're going to pursue another 10% weight loss broken up into 1% of your body weight per week. And again, the absolute numbers change with each phase, but the percentages do not. And so after you take a break from your calorie deficit, you go into another deficit again as you shoot for your revised phase 2 goal, again, another 10% of your current body weight, losing no more than 1% of your body weight each week during that phase. Now, the question that might be in your mind, which is probably the right one, which is, well, when I hit my, say, phase 1 goal, how long do I need to stay there in maintenance phase during my diet break before I can move on to phase 2 and start losing weight again? And the answer is probably longer, the longer the better, right? If you end your diet break too soon, then your hypothalamic set point is probably going to fight you when you go into a calorie deficit again. You just haven't had enough time for your brain literally to settle into your new status and start to feel comfortable with that, as if it is redefining what your normal body weight should be. Right? It needs time to adjust to the new normal because it wants to go back to the old normal. And this is the part that most people don't want to hear, right? They don't want to hear that I, go calorie deficit and lose weight up to a certain point and then I have to stop. Well, why would I stop? Because I still have more weight to lose. And the answer is because you want to lose the weight permanently. You want your body to adapt and to adjust, and so you have to give it time. So obviously, this is not a diet approach that is appropriate if you're 6 weeks out from bikini season and you feel like you want to lose 40 pounds to go to the beach. It's not appropriate if your goal is to fit into a certain size dress for a wedding or a social event, and you've got 25 pounds to get it off very quickly. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about losing an appropriate amount of weight and getting to a body composition and a scale weight and a body fat percentage that you can sustain for health and wellness reasons for the rest of your life. Two different scenarios. So let's make sure that we're not confused on that. But let's talk about the time frame. How long should the diet breaks be? Well, let's say it takes 10 weeks to lose your first 10%. That number is going to be different for different people because you're all going to be at a different starting weight. Everyone's going to shoot for losing 10% per cycle, diet cycle, but only 1% per week. But if I'm starting at 200 pounds, that's different than someone starting at 140, right? And that's just, again, simply the math. But let's say it takes you 10 weeks to lose your first 10%. Then you need to take a break from your calorie deficit for the purpose of letting your body settle into the new weight, thereby reducing friction to continued weight loss at about a period of time that's at least half of the number of weeks that it took you to get there. So if it took you 10 weeks to lose your first 10%, your first diet break should be at least 5 weeks long. And that would be for people who have relatively fewer obstacles or less resistance to weight loss, because somebody who maybe has more obstacles to overcome, or whose hypothalamic set point is really elastic in the sense that it really wants to jump the weight back up to what it's known as normal for a long time, that period of time might stretch out to the exact same number of weeks it took to lose the first 10% or the second 10%, depending on where we are in the cycle. And it might actually take a little bit more. And so the rule of thumb would be, however many weeks it takes you to lose 10% of your body weight, you have to pause and eat maintenance calories for at least half that period of time. And if you are more resistant to weight loss, you may have to pause longer. And so this means that during different phases or diet cycles in the process, you may have to pause only half the amount of time that it took you to get from point A to point B, but at other times you might have to go a little bit more. And the way that you would know that is if you go back into a calorie deficit and you're exercising, being active during your day, doing everything right, if you feel like you're losing metabolic control, you have cravings, your energy's not great, your brain's not working, and all of a sudden, even with a calorie deficit, you're seeing the scale creep up a couple of pounds here and there, then you're not ready and you need to go back and you need to pause in your diet break for a longer period of time. But at the very least, target half of the number of weeks it took you to get to your 10% weight loss. Again, if it took you 10 weeks to get there, pause for at least 5 weeks. If it took you 8 weeks to get there, pause for at least 4 weeks before you go in to the next diet cycle and 10% loss of your body weight, your current body weight. And so it's about a cyclical pattern of calorie deficit to hit a goal, followed by a period of settling into your new weight for a time before you move to your next goal of losing the next 10% of your body weight. And again, if you look at the math of all of this, right, since each phase is based on a 10% weight loss, we don't want to lose more than 1% per week during each diet cycle. It's going to take our theoretical 200-pound person about 10 weeks, losing 2 pounds per week. That gives us 20 pounds total weight loss for a total of 10% lost body weight in that first cycle, followed by at least 5 weeks, perhaps up to 10 if they have more resistance to change, but followed by 5 weeks of diet breaking to allow the body and the brain to settle into the new status. Now, is that slow? Yes. It might take you 3 or 4 cycles to get to your goal. That's okay, because our goal is not rapid weight loss. Our goal is permanent weight loss. Is it slow? Yes. Is it scientific? Yes. Are you likely to be more successful? Hell yes. And if you do it right, and if you're patient throughout the process and you can identify the obstacles to weight loss, which are coming up in additional episodes, then you're going to be able to accomplish what either you have not been able to accomplish any other time in the past, or perhaps that other people like you struggle with because they're not aware of the science behind weight loss. So I'm going to close it out there. And thanks again for joining me after my hiatus with the illness that I had over the last week or so, back in fighting shape again. And join me again here on the Inflammation Nation podcast, where we're talking about obstacles to weight loss. Let's keep it scientific. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Inflammation Nation. If you found this episode valuable, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so that you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. And why not head over to my main website, drnoseworthy.com, that's drnoseworthy.com, to explore my personalized functional medicine coaching programs, submit a question to the podcast, maybe take a quiz, or even reach out to me using the contact form that you can find there. We'll see you next time.